Gord, thanks for being here. Thanks for spending some time with me this afternoon. Maybe just as a starting point, maybe introduce yourself, tell people who you are, what you do, and what your area of expertise and specialty is.
Yeah, my name is Gordon Goldschleger. I'm working as a social impact consultant and coach. I've been here in the sector for the last 20 years, helping people scale their impact on causes that matter most to them.
When you say scale your impact, what does that mean to you? Because I think different people have a different definition of what scaling might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two trajectories. One is, can I affect more people, right? So a bit of horizontal growth, right? Can I reach more people? Or, the second angle is, given who I'm serving, can I have deeper impact with them? Can I go, further down the chain? So there's really two kinds of trajectories for that.
And it seems to me that all organizations could benefit from scaling, but is there a subset of the charitable sector that you're having particularly good results with?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak, Craig, to the organizations that I've worked with, and maybe this is a bit adjacent to your question, but like who's ready to scale? Because early stage organizations, that are less than 10 people or just volunteer run are really not ready to scale. So that those have reached a certain maturity, I think, have sort of looked around and go, look, we've had a certain degree of success. We have some revenue stability. Now they want to have wider impact, and putting my arms out wider, or deeper impact. And so those are the ones that are at that right evolutionary stage.
And when does it go from being, hey, we're building a community that's trying to do amazing things, to we can build a community that's going to do more amazing things?
I don't think there's a formula, but I can tell you that where I've seen organizations, be ready, and let's use revenue just as a proxy holder for stability, but $750,000, $1 million worth of revenue, a full-time ED, some kind of staff who are ready to absorb capacity, right? Because scaling requires investment of time away from program delivery and requires sort of self-reflection and time. And if you're spending all of your time on program delivery, you don't have the time to step back to think strategically about, well, what's next? Because you're mostly, at those smaller stages, the next 3 months, the next week, or tomorrow.
So I'm thinking about somebody who maybe is running a charity that has reached this level, maybe in Brandon, Manitoba, maybe it's in Trois-Rivières, it doesn't really matter where. Is there something that you've seen in common with all these organizations where they're now ready to scale? Is it more than just the executive director has some time to commit to growth?
Yeah, they're probably bumping up against revenue ceilings. Like they're looking to access more funds, to grow more, but they just can't because they haven't really thought strategically about who they serve and what outcomes they're getting. Maybe another answer to that, Craig, is they're getting more demand from the people that they serve, right? But they just they can't put their arms around what additional areas would be helpful, right? So they're hitting up against these bigger questions, and they don't have the time to take a step back and go, okay, well, what are we going to look like in 3 years, right? So for those that are really eager, I think they're hitting some revenue bumps, some revenue ceilings, and they're trying to carve out some good thinking time for what their organization looks like in 3 years.
So what is the work that you're going to do with them, just to get that on the table, that is able to take them when they're ready to make that transition to scaling up their organization? How do you get involved and help them with that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a secret sauce in it, and perhaps it's just a bit of conservative Canadianism, but I think, Craig, it's a bit of visioning, right? Like, well, where do you want to be in 3 and 5 years, right? If you don't have that, and it's amazing how many companies or organizations are stuck in the day-to-day. So a bit of vision, hey, where are you today? And what's that gap in between? And what are those trajectories? And usually, I would say, Craig, there's sort of 3 things that have to happen, right? You've got to have strong governance, you have to have strong measurement systems in place, and you have to have a revenue strategy. There are other things, but I've most often seen that those are the big rampways to scale. So
let's focus on measurement, because I've heard this a lot where organizations will say, we don't have the time to measure. We do, what's your experience in dealing with kind of those organizations where measurement, in your opinion, is a barrier to them scaling up?
Yeah, well, I'm smiling and I'm laughing because, and so are you, and for those who are listening to the audio, we're smiling because it's a massive problem, right? Because I mean, there's three big barriers. Okay, so one is capacity, right? People are busy kind of doing the day-to-day, and they really see, measurement as as a have to do for the funder. And that is not helpful, right? Two is, and it's really related to the funder idea, but there isn't really buy-in or alignment around measurement. People see it as a necessary evil to get money and to report out afterwards. And the third is, there's no overarching tool set to help collect all the different programmatic data, right? But the biggest one is capacity. People are, Craig, here's a good story. It's annual report time coming up at the end of March 31. I can tell you what's going to happen in this sector, right? So the ED is going to send out a note to everyone saying it's annual report time to collect our data, and they're going to hit send, and there's going to be a collective groan across the organization as people scramble to collect data.
So I'm curious about, you pushing the big red send button. Would it be fair to say that if you are on the top of your game, you could request that data at any point, and we can use technology and tools to report back in real time about what the measurement.
And in fact, Craig, so we have that in the financial world. You report to the board quarterly, and so those high-performing organizations have a social impact scorecard that they report quarterly alongside their financials. How are we doing against target? Are we hitting our outcomes? What are the 6 outcomes that we have? How are we tracking this year, and how are we tracking over time? Sophisticated organizations have those measurements in place so that it's not a one-time scramble at annual report time.
But let's go back to the organization that maybe doesn't have that in place, and maybe we're ready to scale, we're ready to take this to the next level. How do you work with them to encourage them to collect the type of data and build the infrastructure to support the reporting of that data when they're still struggling to get the mission done?
I mean, that's $1 million question. And so I think the answer is somewhere in what are the practical solutions that organizations who want to do measurement well, what can they do first? So, here's my secret sauce, and it's not such a secret, but the first thing is, what is your organizational theory of change? Now, I say theory of change and people already start to glaze over, right? But pretty much, what's the sum result of all the programs that you're doing? What's the big change in the community that you expect if you did all your things really well? I can tell you that program leads, they all have that because they know what they're reporting per program, per dollar. But the organization doesn't have an overarching theory of change that says when we add up all those programs, here's what we think is going to happen to the community that we serve. So there's a big opportunity to engage everybody in the organization about what do we stand for and what outcomes are going to happen to the people at the end of the result.
So let's dig in a little bit deeper. The measurement is at the center of what this means. Can you expand a little bit more on what you were saying and the importance of measuring that around that theory of change?
Yeah, I think that if you've got your measurement game down, and it really becomes the center, so that if you're looking to secure more funding, right, that's an offshoot of a good measurement system because you're very clear on the outcomes. And I'm going to be a bit crass here. You can go shop your outcomes. Who wants to buy my outcomes? And you open up conversations that you ordinarily wouldn't have to other governments, levels of government, or what have you. At the center of good measurement, you also have data to both prove and improve what you do. So it's a great comms strategy. Well, at the end of the year, it's annual report time. What measures are we trotting out, for the changes in the conditions of the people that we serve?
But what good is a theory of change if you don't communicate the change that you're having in the community with the other stakeholders that you're invested in?
Well, Craig, I think you got to walk before you run. So if that's what can organizations do? Step one would be, and it could be a 3-month or 4-month engagement. Figure out your theory of change. Figure out your outcomes. What data are you collecting already that align with that? And let's pilot that for 6 months. And then at the end of 6 months, okay, well, what data do we have? And can we talk to the world, right? But you don't have a shot in hell, frankly, of communicating that those results if you don't have your theory of change down.
And what's the process? I mean, it strikes me as strange because if I've created a charity, I'm at this point where I want to scale up. Clearly, there's a change that we want to see in the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. How do you translate that notional, hey, this is the change we want to see, into an actionable theory of change that infects and the entire organization and everything?
Yeah. Sure. To me, that's the fun of facilitation and then the fun of bringing people together, because people will have different perspectives on what that thing is that brought them together in the first place. So it's a real opportunity to hear diverse perspectives on what is that overarching vision or change in the community, right? And what's the pathway for that? What's the short-term outcomes? What are the medium-term outcomes? And what are the long-term outcomes? So what are the change in awareness? What are the change in behaviors and what's the change in conditions? And you can have a very dynamic conversation about what people actually think is going to happen as a result of our intervention. And that, if you don't force that conversation, people make it up on their own.
So inside an organization, who are the people that are going to be having that conversation around bringing that theory of change to life?
So to bring that theory of change to life, I think, and this is about the big mindset change or alignment, but I think it's a board conversation for sure. It's a senior management conversation for sure, and it's a frontline staff. You should engage the entire organization in the development, because if you want people to not see measurement as just a funding thing, they have to have skin in the game, and this is how they get skin in the game.
So we've talked a little bit about the theory of change and the importance of that, but I want to come back to the measurement piece, which is critical. Assume now that an organization has done the homework, they're ready to go. What are the common barriers that people have when it comes to measuring the impact that they're having in the communities they're trying to serve?
So what I see is two things. Organizations are collecting data all over the place, and so barrier one is, oh my gosh, what are we collecting today? And usually, that's the easy thing to settle. They can go out and find it, but then how do you bring it under one umbrella, one Excel spreadsheet if that's what you do? So that's barrier number one. Barrier number two is, and that's for the data that you have, and let's say that takes you 40% of the way, or 50% of the way. Then you're like, oh my gosh, I have these other outcomes, but we're not collecting that data, so what do you do? And so it's simple. It's like Rome isn't built in a day. All right, well, what new data collection tools do we need? Do we need surveys? Do we need self-reporting mechanisms? What is that? And how can we roll that out in a way that doesn't break the organization? So there's really two things. Collecting and looking strategically about the stuff that you do collect and getting it organized. And then, all right, what's the pathway to now creating new data collection tools for the stuff that you don't have? And that could be an 18-month voyage, right?
When it comes to incorporating new tools, though, are you finding that are you finding that organizations struggle to introduce new tools because they don't fit with their current system?
Yes.
Maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet, maybe they're using a CRM, but if it doesn't fit, it feels hard.
Yeah, and that's a bit of like what's facing the organization right then and there. So surveys are hard for people, right? Like, what questions do you ask? I can't. My participants have left. I can't survey them. That's another big barrier. People are loath to share, like it's siloing. That's my information. That's my participant. You can't, talk to them. So there's all kinds of barriers. But again, if you've done that engagement on the theory of change, you've already started to break down those barriers so that when data collection time comes, you can look across the organization and create tools that work for the entire organization.
So if the best time to start collecting data was 10 years ago, the second best time is today. So.
What is that about? Planting trees?
Yeah, just get on with it.
There's a version of that, yeah.
With all these competing priorities for organizations that are at this inflection point where they're ready to go to the next level, are there some strategies that you can share where leaders can say, I'm going to make measurement, the collection of data and the measuring of the impact we're having, my best friend, and really use it to propel forward? Are there some best practices that you've seen?
Yeah, I haven't seen the question framed like that before. I'm just trying to think of. It speaks to, I think, to a bit of mindset. Like, what's the mindset of the organization? And so, if the organization is still very much in the funding is for funders only, I think what leaders can do is start to seed the conversation that no, measurement is a strategic advantage, and that we want to go from responding to proposals where we have to turn ourselves into a pretzel to give measurement for the funder to seeking out funders and saying, we have these outcomes, do you want to buy them? And that is a dramatically different position. One is a position of not from strength. It's I probably have a better framework. But the second one is a position of strength. I've got outcomes. government, foundations, you want these, do you want to buy them?
It's a really interesting phrase. That's probably going to be the title we're going to use, measurement as a strategic advantage. But how much of the measurement is the strategic advantage versus the reporting or the engagement that the measurement allows you to do? How do you bridge the gap between, we've collected and we've measured all this great data, but now we got to tell people, like we got to tell the board and we got to tell our stakeholders, like how important is getting that communication piece right?
I think once you have the former, the latter becomes a lot easier, right? Because, I'm a big proponent of less is more. Like on any organization, 8 outcomes would be a ton of outcomes, and you're going to have percentage increase. You're going to have some outcomes, right? And so, the data is going to tell the story for you as a result of that data collection. So I think the communicating of it, I'm not suggesting that you don't have to have strategy and marketing and comms, but you can have tier one marketing and comms, but if you don't have your outcomes story and the data that tells that, what are those guys doing? Nothing for you.
How important is that then for the data that you collect and are measuring to influence the future direction of the organization? How important is that?
Craig, it's like the data is going to tell you, do I need to improve my programs or not, right? So when you get the data back and you expect the numbers to do this, actually they're tanking like this, hey, our intervention isn't working. We've got to change our intervention. So it's not just for communicating to the outside world, it's actually for adjusting your program delivery in line with your big outcomes. So it's incredibly important.
Again, I'm coming back to a small charity that's maybe just trying to explore this. Let's make up a simple example. What might that look like for an organization? What might data collection, data measuring, and then how might they get that level of reporting?
Look, you might say, the organization might say, look, our ultimate outcome is to, get people off the street and into loving homes and good jobs. And so you might say, okay, well, that first thing is, they need to know that they need education. So it's something about awareness. You have to tell your constituents, or they have to learn that, they need to eat healthy and get off the street. Then the second thing is our intervention would be around, in the medium term, around behaviors. Okay, they have to learn that they need skills, so they have to do some skill development. And so you get outcomes around that. And then the third one is, okay, well, they've got to change their condition from being off the street and being into housing. And so that would be a third option. So you build out these outcomes that take them along a path from not knowing what they need to know to knowing what they need to know, for them to take actions and behaviors, and to then move into a more solid sets of housing.
So with all the measurement that's been done, with all the, you've done the theory of change, you understand the importance of data collection. When you take that to the board, what is the expectation that the board is going to do to encourage you to grow to the next level?
Well, I hope the board would have contributed, to that theory of change, because that is an excellent conversation for them to have, because it really stands to, what do we stand for and what changes do we want to see in the world, right? So I hope it's not like an add-on, that the board has been engaged and involved in the creation of, probably for the board, what's that ultimate outcome? Like that's really where they play, right? And then it would be up to the ED to figure out, well, how do I get us there, right? But the board would have a strong hand in what's that ultimate change.
When we look at chasing that ultimate goal, right? And now you've put that down in indelible marker.
Yeah.
How often, in your experience working with clients, do they review the theory of change to say, are we in fact measuring the right things?
Yeah.
What's the best practice for reviewing what you're measuring to see if it's hitting your mission?
Yeah, so for high performing organizations that we've seen, you've got a quarterly scorecard, right, for your social outcomes, right, that you review alongside your financial outcomes. I mean, you would never an organization that's got a $3 million budget never would not look at its budget only once a year. It looks quarterly, right? What are our actuals against budget and what's our variance? Same thing. And then after 3 reports of going off variance, then you're like, okay, wait a minute. What's the real problem here? We should go back to our theory of change.
So I guess what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you embrace measurement as a tool to advance your organization as a strategic advantage, you can't go halfway with it. It's got to be something that you fully incorporate across all aspects of the organization, from the board to the quarterly reporting scorecard to how it influences your communication. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, but I think it is, but I don't want to scare people and going, you have to go from 0 to 100, right? Like there are some small steps. Step 1, create your theory of change, engage your board, engage your staff. Step 2, what data are you currently collecting that aligns with those outcomes? Step 3, what are our gaps in data collection? Let's create new tools. So that would be a great 1-year plan for any organization who wants to do measurement.
How often would you recommend that people take a look at their theory of change to see if it's evolved?
Yeah. I think it's a good, I don't know if I have a hard and fast rule, and I don't want to be attacked by the consultant police on the sector, but probably when you're doing your strategic plan, refresh or that's a great time to look at who we are and does it need to shift. But I think if you are looking at it quarterly, right? Like you're naturally going to be way more in touch than, it's time to look at measure. Like it's not going to be that dramatic of a shift. You're going to see what's happening, right?
What is the mindset shift that's required for people to say, I now understand that measurement is important and I'm going to try and impose or inform the rest of our organization with this?
Yeah, so there's more laughing. We keep smiling a lot here, right? It is, the mindset shift is, I am not hired as part of like a program. Let's talk about from the program staff, right? I am a part of a bigger mission here that my organization is trying to do. My program contributes to that larger, it's one piece of a larger whole. And let's go back to our annual report. When that email comes from the ED on annual report time, you don't groan. You go, oh my God, I'm so excited to show you my outcomes and how they ladder up to the big outcomes of the organization. That would be the big mindset shift.
When organizations embrace measurement as the strategic advantage, it seems to me that if you can infect this throughout all of the things you're doing, it may not be the first, second, or third step that you do as you're going on this journey, but it's something that you need to always have in the back of your mind that, hey, eventually we want to get to this point.
Yeah, it's going to happen, Greg. I mean, I've seen it too often, right? Like those organizations that have good measurement systems and report to themselves quarterly, money follows. It just happens all the time, right? Because they're crisper, they can educate their funders on what outcomes that they get, and there's a broader landscape out there. And so when that starts to happen, I think that's when people kind of go, oh yeah, now I get it. I see why. And when opportunities come, you can look again, well, does that funding give us those outcomes? No, we shouldn't go there. So it takes some time, but when it happens, things light up.
But it's not happening overnight. It's a journey. You have to take the right steps in the right direction to get to where you need to go. Yeah. And ultimately, if you want to grow, you need to embrace these high impact strategies that are being used by the best performing organizations.
Absolutely. There's no way that you're going to grow from 1 to 3 million without a solid measurement framework, right? It is at the heart of what you do, right?
Talk to me about the type of data that you're seeing and maybe the difference in the way you might embrace that.
Or I might take it from another angle. Like sometimes when people move into measurement, they fear that they're going to lose the human element of the impact that they have. Because often, you can imagine that people come to this work altruistically, or they come from a social work background, and they think data is often a 4-letter word for dehumanizing the work that we do. And from my point of view in the organizations that I've worked with, there's hardcore numbers for sure, but there's also the qualitative stories, right? And that is equally as valid. And when you put those two together, qualitative stories of change and quantitative data, you get a fulsome story, right? So I don't think people should be afraid of data that it's going to take them away from the mission and what brought them there, to the contrary.
So maybe the best way to kind of tie all this up with a nice bow is just by way of an example. Can you give an example of how this measurement has really impacted organizations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the example that I like to talk about is RISE. RISE is a microloan organization here in Toronto who gives small loans to people with a history of mental health. And so I've worked with them when I was with Lift Impact Partners over, a 6-7 year period. So I'm quite familiar with their organization, and I helped shape some of their measurement practices. But so one would think that the kind of data that they're going to report on as someone who gives loans is default rates, and and they've got that, right? But their theory of change, they're talking about changing the overall well-being of the person that they serve. And so, well, what the hell does well-being mean? And so they've actually figured out or helped define well-being under personal well-being, professional well-being, and financial well-being. And over the last number of years, Craig, they've surveyed the people who get their loans. And so they have some longitudinal data that they report on every year in their impact report. And so on personal well-being, so in their impact report just came out, they have data, and the outcome that they're reporting on under personal well-being is the percent of clients more confident taking on new challenges. And they show a steady rise from 2021 to 2023 to 2024. And they do that again across professional well-being. They have the statement that says the percent of clients more confident in making their business decisions. And they show some longitudinal data from 2021 to 2023 to 2024. And it's on the uprise. And the same thing with financial well-being, the percent of clients who have enough money to cover their necessary expenses every month or most months. And they move from 40% to almost 60% over 3-year times. Now that's a sophisticated engine to have those questions about well-being that ladder up to their overall outcome and that they collect that over time and report back. I mean, that is extremely sophisticated. And they can show those outcomes to funders.
I think it's a perfect illustration of the way you can use data to not just inform your funders, but also stretch the capabilities of your organization. Gord, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your knowledge with everybody.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
My pleasure.